Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the ALS Community Summit with AM ALS. My name is Tiffany Card. I'm from ALS United Greater New York, formerly ALS Association Greater New York. Happy to be here and be part of this great collaborative process. This morning, we're doing working within the system, advocacy on the inside. So you're going to get all the secrets to great advocacy work today with our great panel. I'm going to start off by giving you some bios of your presenters today, and we have one lovely person who will be on our Zoom screen. So great hybrid examples here. Okay, we're going to start with Ronald next to me here, who is a retired Air Force Master Sergeant and retired Finance Director of the city of Goose Creek, South Carolina. Diagnosed with ALS October 2016. Since being diagnosed, he's been a strong advocate. He started a successful campaign to get the South Carolina legislature to budget $500,000 for ALS care services. He is a co-chairperson of the ALS Association Patient and Caregivers Advisory Committee. He has served on the ALSA South Carolina Mid-Atlantic Advisory Boards, and he is also a member of the AM ALS Special Events Team. Great. Next, we have on screen should be Sharon Hall. She is an FTD subject matter expert, certified caregiving consultant, certified Eden Associate, advocate, educator, trainer, podcaster, care partner to her spouse who lives at home and has behavior variant frontotemporal dementia. She has been a speaker at the NIH Research Summit on Dementia Care and Services, Gerontology Conferences, Caregiving Conference, and the AFTD Annual Conference, among others. She has written numerous articles on being an FTD care partner and facilitates a biweekly FTD care partner chat. She also has a podcast, Talking FTD, on Podbean. Next, we have Caitlin Peruccio is Legislative Counsel and Senior Policy Advisor for Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut since 2018. Her legislative portfolio includes health and human services, housing, tax, and immigration. She previously served as the legislative aide and legislative correspondent for Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Caitlin received a JD from the University of Connecticut School of Law and a BA in Political Science and French from Providence College. Next, I believe we have David. David Steury has worked to further biomedical research and improve patient access to needed therapies in roles spanning Congress, the executive branch, and the private sector. While serving as Representative Mike Quigley's health policy advisor, David led the House side negotiations to pave the way for Act for ALS to be signed into law. David is current health policy director for Representative Diane DeGuette, who co-led the 21st Century Cures Act and continues to be one of the greatest champions of biomedical research in Congress. And last but not least, Rob. Rob became involved with ALS advocacy when his sister-in-law was diagnosed with ALS in 2018. In 2019, he retired from a 37-year career in the pharmaceutical industry that included multiple roles from bench chemistry to global commercial analytics. Rob is an active member of the clinical trial team at AM ALS and helps other teams when he can. So that gives you a brief rundown of the folks that you're going to hear from today. What we're going to do is we're going to give everyone about 7 to 10 minutes to give you a little input on what they've been doing and some of their successes. And then we'll take questions at the very end. And go ahead, Ron, kick us off.
Good morning. So I retired from the military. The military has a lot of great benefits for veterans with ALS. Unfortunately, those that weren't in the military don't have any benefits. So as I was on the advisory board one day, I asked, how do we solve this problem? Well, the federal government's not going to solve it. So I said, well, why don't we get money from the states? Some states give money for it. And they said, well, we never tried that in South Carolina. So I made an appointment with my local state senator and the director of DHS, and we met. ALS Association was nice enough to put together a nice package for me, and they had a lobbyist zoom in, and we talked to him, and we presented him the paperwork. I'll be honest with you, originally I was going to ask for $100,000. While we were talking, the director from DHS says, we could easily fund $500,000. And I said, that's what we were thinking. So, unfortunately, then the senator, Senator Sen, she says, but it's going to be impossible to do this year because the governor's already prepared his budget. So then it goes to the House and they got to do whatever they're going to do to it. And it's got to go to the Senate. And then, of course, it's got to go get signed by the governor. When she told me it was impossible, excuse me, I said, I don't think so. So I went back and I sent an email and that package to the guy that was in charge of the House budget, Representative Herb Kirschman. That's all one name. And I sent him that and I said, I'd like to have a meeting with you. And his office said, okay. And then I got an email from him saying, we don't need to meet. And I was kind of devastated. But he called me and he said, I read all what you sent me. He said, I've already put it in the House budget. And he said, I never put stuff in the House budget. I let somebody else do it. So he put in the House budget. After he put in the House budget, I went and I made up some sample emails and I emailed them to everybody I could think of to email their local senator and their local House representative. And I have copies afterwards if somebody wants. It's not much of a thing, but I don't want you to have to write all that down. But we all emailed them. It passed the House resoundingly. It passed the Senate. And then we were worried, is it going to pass the governor's veto? Because in South Carolina, the governor is very conservative. He loves his veto pin. And in South Carolina, you can do line item vetoes. However, he did not veto it. So we got $500,000. So, what do we do with that? How do we spend it? The idea behind that was to cover what I called gap insurance, that 20% or more that people have to pay for equipment, for your wheelchair, for everything, all your DME. Your insurance doesn't pay for 100% of it. So that's what we did with it. But we also carved out $250,000. The reason why we did that was Columbia, South Carolina is in the middle of the state. It's 2 hours to the nearest ALS clinic from Columbia, roughly. If you're in a wheelchair and you have to make that 2-hour drive, those folks really have about a 3-hour process. So we wanted to do an ALS clinic in Columbia, so we dedicated $250,000 for that. The reason for that is most people don't know the clinics get no money from the insurance people. The doctor, if he's not assigned to the hospital, gets paid by the hospital if we can file, but the PT person, the dietitian, the counseling person, none of those people get paid from insurance. That's all funded by the local hospital. And quite frankly, they have a problem with it. So we gave them $250,000 and they're trying to set up a clinic there. Of course, they also have to find a neuromuscular doctor. They don't have one in Columbia, but they're working on that. Then with the rest of the money, we did things like ramps. Most of you probably put in a ramp. You know that it costs a lot of money to put in a wooden ramp. Unfortunately, you may not need that wooden ramp very long. So what we did was we contracted, they've contracted with a company to come put in metal ramps. And then when you're all done, You know, when you don't need it anymore, they can take it and put it somewhere else. So that money is reused. The way the process works is you request through your care services person in the ALS Association for what we call a grant. They do the paperwork. It gets approved. The ALS Association then orders it, does whatever, and then they get reimbursed by the state up until we use up all that $500,000. Right now, I mandated my thing to the ALS Association was I didn't want them to take any of the money for processing. They did not the first year. I honestly can't say what they're going to do the second year. But that's what we did with it. $50,000 for quality of life grants. And I have some handouts for you here if you want them. But in all honesty, it's an easy process. If your state's not giving money, that says 7 minutes. If your state's not giving money for ALS care services, you can do it. You just got to find the right people.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was really great. I'm sure everyone is excited to go back home and do that in their own state. We'll take up follow-up questions later. Next, we're going to go on screen to Sharon Hall. Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Sharon Hall, and I am the care partner for my husband, Rod, who has frontotemporal dementia. His mother had frontotemporal dementia, but I did not know what I was looking at when he started exhibiting these behaviors that were very uncommon to him. But I had no idea that his mother also did that. We ended up first in marriage counseling, as about 98% of couples who encounter this diagnosis of behavior variant FTD start. And I could see he was really trying, but nothing was happening. And I was very discouraged. I thought I was going to lose my marriage. I was contemplating divorce. And I saw a video about frontotemporal dementia. And my heart stopped. I said, that's what Rod has. He has what his mother had. Yet I had no clue of the symptoms that I was seeing were any part of FTD until I saw that video. So we got a diagnosis. I went right to a center of excellence. I wasn't going to get misdiagnosed. We're highly misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed. So I went right to the source and we did get in and had a diagnosis. And I set out to say, if I had it in Rod's family and had no idea what I was looking at when my husband started changing for no apparent reason, he wasn't the person I married. How do other people know this? So I put on my big girl panties and went out and started advocating. And my first sort of tipping my toe in the lake of advocacy was writing a blog post that one of my friends had on the Huffington Post. And I explained how those of us in the community really need to be telling our stories. And it went viral, very viral. We were both quite shocked. It got to the people that were co-chairing the NIH Research Summit on Dementia Care and Services, and they asked me to be on a committee for the caregivers to come up with some things that were needed in the young onset community. And so I joined that committee, and then I was asked to speak at the NIH Research Summit. And I did that. I was petrified, but I did do it. And it actually started what I call a tsunami. I dipped my toe in the lake of advocacy and a tsunami followed. So I was then asked over and over and over again to do things, and I just kept saying yes. People would say, Sharon, would you? And I would say yes before they even got out what they wanted me to do. I figured, I'll figure it out. And I knew that the most important thing in advocacy are our stories. Our stories matter. Telling our story in its completely unvarnished, absolute truth is what moves the needle. Nothing else can move the needle like our stories. So I encouraged people to do that. I started a caregiver chat that we talked about the things that we found difficult, the things that maybe we could make things better for other people behind us. And I started that chat, and then I started a podcast with an expert in the field and got her to talk about the things that we needed to know, like nobody ever died from not taking a shower. And that was one of the things that FTD can exhibit, the lack of self-care. And it was like a miracle to me that she could come up with these things that were so meaningful. So we did many years of that podcast with her. She then retired and subsequently has passed away, but she was my mentor. And she got me involved in several other things, like speaking to CMS on a webinar about FTD, because it's very unknown. But those of you in the ALS community probably know more about it than anyone else, because we do share that C9orf72 gene, and many people with ALS also exhibit behavior variant FTD. Sometimes they're diagnosed with the FTD first and then ALS, sometimes the opposite. But we have a close relationship. And my one goal, it still has the one goal that I was so adamant about was having the SSDI weight for benefits and Medicare dropped. I have fervently worked on that for 9 years, and it hasn't been easy as the lone wolf out there screaming in the dark. But I will do that before I retire. And I'm not young. I need to retire. I'm trying desperately to pass on the reason for advocacy and how to do advocacy and telling your story and not being afraid and speak from your heart, speak from what you live with daily. Tell people what this disease is. Explain to them that this person is not a jerk. They have a degenerative brain disease and they absolutely cannot help what comes out of their mouth. It's a very antisocial disease and very difficult to be out in society. But I said, go and tell. Take your people out. Take brochures with you about FTD. If something happens in public, pass them out and just talk, talk, talk. Even if it's to the person in front of you in the grocery line, that's advocacy. Even if you want to write a letter to your congressperson or your senator, that's advocacy. Anything you do to get your story into the hands of people that don't know what your disease is so, so important. But remember, if you go to the lake of advocacy and you dip your toe in, make sure you have an umbrella and you have a raincoat on, because that tsunami comes. Once you speak out, people are going to come to you and you choose what you feel comfortable doing. I just did it ever. I did whatever anybody asked me to do. If I didn't know how to do it, I figured it out. So I just kept going, and I'm still going because we still don't have that weight for SSDI benefits and Medicare dropped yet. But I'm working on it, and by goodness, I'm going to get it. So go out there, talk your story, talk from your heart, talk about what happens to you every single day, because people do not know, and there's nothing to be ashamed of for a neurodegenerative disease. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sharon. I have no doubt that you are going to get it done. Okay, next we have David.
Thanks all. It's really wonderful to be here with you today. I'm David Steury. I'm currently Health Policy Director for Diana DeGuette, Congresswoman from Colorado. But I think the reason that I'm here today is because when Congress was considering the Act for ALS, I worked for Congressman Mike Quigley, who was this real tireless champion of that bill. I always told people he didn't know a whole lot about ALS at first, and this was before my time, but he took a meeting with Brian Wallach, and at the end of that meeting, he would have run through a brick wall for the guy, and that really kicked off his involvement with that bill and with this community. So I actually had somebody ask me the other day, what made that effort successful, and what has made this movement successful? And with the kind of wondering, how can I replicate that? And I thought for a minute, and I thought, I don't know how you do replicate that, because it has been so driven by all of you, and by it's been a truly grassroots movement. And so you have people like Brian, like Dan Tate, like Sandy Morris, like Nicole Chimbura, like that, who are just doing and all of the people in this room who are, as Sharon said, bringing their stories to the Hill, to their members of Congress, and really making that case. And that's something that's really hard to replicate from the top down. It really requires it requires all of you. So Caitlin and I have we've I think both seen both a lot of extremely effective advocates, and again, a lot of them are in this room. We've also seen some really ineffective ones. And so I think both of us would want to talk to you about what really makes an effective advocate. First, coordinate. It's one of the most important things you can do is come to the Hill with a coordinated message between you and all of the partners that you're working with. If you are hammering home, if everybody is hammering home the same message, saying we need this thing to get done, then your chances of getting that thing done are much higher. And so again, this community has done a really amazing job with that, and I encourage you to really keep at that. Before you go to the Hill, get the different organizations in a room, get all the stakeholders in a room, and come up with a plan. And then when members hear from a wide variety of different organizations in a given area, if they're hearing from all of the different advocacy groups in ALS all coming with the same thing, they hear, okay, that's probably something we should really consider. If they hear 10 different solutions from 10 different groups, they're gonna, in all likelihood, throw up their hands. So that's one thing where really keep up the good work. And another thing is the most of the people in the government, whether it's the legislative branch or the executive branch, are really working in good faith, even when they're not doing exactly what we would like them to do. And so a huge part of this is understanding why they think that what they're doing is the right thing, and why that's their job, and craft your message around their understanding of the situation, and how your understanding of the situation should affect that. And so always bring those stories, bring how the government is either putting up barriers or how it is able to help. And those specifics, those stories, and I think most importantly, any just data you can bring are always just really incredibly helpful.
What was the last thing you just said? What's incredibly helpful?
Data. Yeah.
He said data.
Yeah. And I think one thing that goes along with that is if an agency, say FDA, for instance, is doing something or not doing something that you would like it to do, see if it's following its own policies, for one thing. I think that's one thing that we talked a lot about in the past few years, whether it was it living up to the promises that it had made itself. And second, and if it is, remind them of that. and then if no, it is following the policies and we're still not getting those results, then criticizing the results is easy. But what is necessary is to come up with a policy solution that would create a different result. And going to FDA and saying, we think you made the wrong decision is all well and good, but especially if there is a way that you can change the policies so that they can arrive at the right decision, and going to Congress and saying, we think that this change is needed, then that is the most powerful message. I guess at this point, I want to turn it over to Caitlin, because she has a really incredible wealth of knowledge, especially on the government funding side. And we worked very, very closely together on all of this. And she's a extremely good resource.
Well, so is David. So the feeling's mutual. And so, hi, I'm Caitlin Peruccio. I work for Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, and she is the lead Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee and the Labor, Health, and Human Services Appropriations Subcommittee. Knock on wood, she'll be the chair writing these bills next Congress. Fingers crossed. And so what everyone has said is so true, and the stories do really matter, because if Congress isn't hearing from folks, it can be like a problem doesn't exist. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And so all of you being here you're putting the work in, because you're showing up and meeting with members or their staffs. And so your stories do matter, because you're the ones living this at the end of the day. As my boss Rosa would say, once she'd say she's not a scientist, she's not living with XYZ thing, but you have standing. And people would be more inclined to listen to you than, say, Rosa DeLauro, depending on who you're talking to. But so where we focus a lot of our efforts is on the government funding component. And, within the labor HHS bill, because of this movement, we have secured increased funding for Act for ALS and other ALS research, whether at DOD, in CDC. And that's a testament to this movement. And like what David was saying, because everyone came with essentially the same asks, it makes it a lot easier, instead of having, look, you can have 5 different asks, and as long as they're unified, that's okay. Whether we have the funding to do that, that's a different story. But if everyone's like, well, we only want this or we want that, it makes it that much harder, because it shows there's a lack of agreement across the community. And at the end of the day, the end goals are the same, and sometimes there might be different approaches on how to get there, but this community is really special. And I actually do think others could replicate this. It's going to be tricky, but it's one of the most successful advocacy movements I've seen in my time on the Hill, which is almost 10 years now. And so talking about government funding, as if Rosa were here, and poor David and Jackie have already heard me say this, that appropriations bills are the only ones that have to move every year, or else we have a government shutdown, which is catastrophic. So, set aside we love our authorizers, but, we can authorize a bill, and if there's money, we have to find it in appropriations, which is easier said than done. And if any of you have seen For Love and Life, you heard how, it was going to be so tricky to get the funding in the first year. Like, that is an anomaly. There have been programs that have been authorized for years, and we have not been able to find the money. And that's for a plethora of reasons that I will spare you right now. And so coming in to talk to member offices, we love to hear from our constituents. if you're from Connecticut, I'll meet with anyone. We're a small state, so I honestly meet with anyone. You could be from Hawaii, I'll probably still meet with you. But for some offices, if you're not from that state or frankly, even that district, they might say no to a meeting. And that's their prerogative, right or wrong. And so going in really local is critically important, kind of like what Ron was talking about in his South Carolina experience. But what Rosa would tell you too, it's great you're all here in Washington, but you don't have to come to Washington. Our bosses all have, offices back home. Request a meeting there. And if like you're, an advocate, go meet in the district offices. We do that all the time. I get zoomed into a lot of meetings. Sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to go up to Connecticut because I'll just join these meetings. I'm also from Connecticut, so it makes it easier. But also if you're in the research community, invite members to come see your lab, to see what you're working on. I'd like to think seeing is believing. For some members, might not be, but for others, they like to see what's going on, especially if they have received government funding. Like that is, everybody loves to bring money back home to their district. Or if you are a pharma company, invite them to come see what you're working on in your own labs or in the manufacturing processes. That makes it much more tangible to members in the abstract. And it still might not be enough, but the stories are the most critically important component. Rosa would also say, you can write letters to the editor, just say, I'm in the ALS community. We hope Congresswoman X supports 75 million at the NIH, which really is like a drop in the, $1 million drop in the bucket for the NIH, but 75 million is really not that much money for the NIH, if we're being honest, and 25 million for FDA, really not that much. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. And so, every member of Congress has these services that like will fine when they're mentioned in the media. So like, that's why it's important to name names. So you can write an op-ed, letter to the editor, and these are all tips Rosa will give to anyone. So we're all hearing the same message. And she would also say, but I don't think anyone's taken her up on this, is you can throw your own press conference outside of a member's office. Like if they're going to support cutting funding, you can do that. Again, I don't think anybody's taken her up on that advice, but that is something she has suggested. Because again, all politics is local at the end of the day. It's great you're here in DC. I'm glad we're having lovely weather for you, but it's also about the folks back home. And so that's critically important as well. And so I'll say this, we were able to protect the funding last year for Act for ALS and at DOD and at CDC. Unfortunately, there was no increase. We are in a budget cap situation, which caps our cuts, which means we're constrained with the amount of funding we can spend. And so that means there was very few increases. And so level funding was a victory, which we know in biomedical terms, that's actually a cut, but it actually could have been a cut. So trying to see the forest from the trees on here. And so we are in a second year of that budget cap. And so again, level funding will be a victory. And so I would, not to say fiscal year 2025 is a total wash, it kind of is. So use this year to educate members, especially there are a lot of new members on either side of the aisle that their staff might be new. The members themselves, they may know nothing about ALS, which that's okay, but that means you can control the narrative, like you can educate them. So really spend this year, my encouragement to anyone in the community is really to spend this year educating members and their staffs about why we need increased funding when, knock on wood, we're outside of the budget caps next year and we have more funding to invest in these critical programs. And also with the message too, that if funding is cut, what does this mean? Does that mean someone, I'll choose Yale because that's in our district, does Yale have to close down a lab and then waste years of research because funding is cut? You have to say the good, and we not to be like hyperbolic and like, scary tactics, but that is a real reality if there are cuts to funding. Rosa would say like, we can talk about cutting funding for biomedical research once we have a treatment or a cure for everything. But until then, we have to keep moving forward. And so you're all here, you're doing the work, you have incredible leaders to replicate and model. And so, but it really is just sharing that personal story. And I will say one thing about email correspondence or handwritten letters. I was legislative correspondent for Senator Murphy many moons ago. And we get, a lot of the same email, which is absolutely fine. But the emails that will really stand out to offices are that personal story. That could be something, I am living with ALS or I am a caregiver. I maybe get, and say you're advocating for like caregiving supports and like tell your story, that you're more inclined to get maybe a personal response or a phone call to see about how we can help you. And so your stories matter. And so do share them. Someone does read them. I can assure you of that. But thank you all for having me, and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Caitlin and David. That was great. And last but not least is we have Rob.
Thank you. Thank you. As you've heard, I'm Rob Faulstich, and I have been a part of the clinical trials team for about 3 or so years now. And I really think that the clinical trials team and the work that we do embodies this concept of working within the system. So I'm going to start by reading our mission. The clinical trials team partners with researchers, government agencies, and drug sponsors to ensure access, efficiency, and humaneness of ALS therapy development and approval. It collects and distributes information regarding clinical trials to the ALS community. So when I first saw that mission, I thought, well, who are we, this ragtag group of volunteers? No disrespect to the team, of course. Why would these people pay attention to us? We're talking, major drug companies. We're talking government agencies. What is it about this team that would, get them to stand up and listen? And I think that starts with the late great Sandy Morris. I say great only because it rhymes with late, but great doesn't even begin to describe her legacy. I mean, she has, had such an impact on this entire community. It's really immeasurable. And she was the founder of the clinical trials team, and she was the leader of the clinical trials team when I joined. And her legacy lives on. The work that she started, we continue, and that really there was a lot that she did that has given us that voice in the with the pharma industry and with the government agencies. And one of the things that she said was an offhand comment, and I've tried to check this with people, and I'm not sure that they remember it the way I do. But she said, "You know what? We don't want to be hair on fire advocates." And I thought about that, and I was like, why wouldn't you? If you have ALS, and we all know that the ALS clock is relentless and it moves very quickly, if anybody should have their hair on fire, it would be ALS advocates and people living with ALS and their caregivers. And so, how do you reconcile that? And I think, as I thought more about it, it's like, it's how do you deal with somebody with their hair on fire? You just extinguish it. But if you come in with a cool head, you gain that credibility. If you understand the system, you work within it, as opposed to trying to burn it down and start over again. And so that, to me, actually was great to hear, because that's kind of how I like to operate. I like to find a way, understand the system, find where it can be improved, and nudge it and push it in the right direction. And that doesn't mean that we're not insistent. That doesn't mean that we don't work hard. That doesn't mean that we're not, that we're not aware of the ALS clock. It just means that we want to figure out how to get things done and then actually do that. And so I was glad that was the approach that we were taking, and that we were going to approach it from a point of credibility, and that we were going to establish that first and then try to move things. And another reason, really, that I didn't want to be a hair on fire advocate is, like, if you look at me, you can tell that I really don't have much fuel to offer for the fight. So anyway, so one of the ways that we do that is it's a PaCTD rating system, and I'll describe that to you in a minute. But Sandy kept this thing, she called it the drug sponsor spreadsheet. She said, "This is the keys to the kingdom. After I'm gone, you guys have to carry this on." And we've done that. And we maintain a list of everybody, to our knowledge, that has a therapy in development for ALS. And so we focus on everybody. We're interested in everybody. We want to partner with them. We want to hear their voice. We want them to hear our voice as well. And then we want and so we want to focus the ones that have a late stage trial, because that's where we really feel like that we can make an impact. And there are things that we want to be able to have an opinion about a trial. And it's not whether or not we think this drug therapy is going to work, because that's why they're doing the trial. We don't know. It's an experiment, and it's an experimental treatment. And I just want to stop and say thank you to all of the people that participate in a clinical trial, whether it's ALS or anything. That is how things get done. That is how we learn. And that is, it's an act of altruism to participate in a trial. And I want to just stop and say thank you to everybody that participates. So anyway, we focus on late stage, and that's when we want to try to engage these companies as they're designing these trials. And so why would they listen to us? Well, one of the ways that we want to make sure that they understand that their trial should be centered around the patient. So we developed a system called it's called the PaCT rating system. PaCT stands for Patient-Centered Trial Design. And it's a 5-star system. It has multiple components, and their access is one of the components. And access, really, we call that seats on the bus. So that is 3 things, and that's the most important. So there's 60% of the weighting of the 5 stars, or 3 of the 5 stars, is related to this. One of them, well, actually, let me define a seat on the bus. A seat on the bus is an opportunity to receive the active therapy. So that is not the placebo. That is not sitting on the sidelines. That's the active drug. And so the first thing is the placebo ratio. Traditionally, half the people get placebo, half the people get the active treatment. We would like to see more opportunities for the active treatment. So a placebo ratio that is 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 is preferable, and you can get a star for that. The other one is open label extension. So as you are finish the trial, if you are on placebo, everybody has the opportunity, whether the placebo or active, to continue on, and that is a seat on the bus. And then finally, for those who are ineligible, who don't meet the criteria for the clinical trial, expanded access program. So that's a way to get the experimental therapy if you don't qualify. So that's seats on the bus, and that's the most important one. The next one is the advancing science. And so there used to be multiple components to that, and we've evolved it, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but there were multiple components to that. But the idea is we want innovation. We want ways to actually move the science forward. If we don't do that, we're going to continue to repeat the mistakes of the past. And, it's been 50 years since they started calling it Lou Gehrig disease, and we haven't improved life expectancy by very much. So we need to advance science quickly. And then finally, patient centricity, simple things like paying for travel or paying for parking or things like that. It's, those are important, and that's part of our rating system as well. So this was a rigorous process to develop the weightings, and it was actually presented at a scientific meeting, the MND Symposium in 2020. And again, that's sort of that credibility that we're looking for, to be able to present that and share it with the scientific community. So anyway, it's hard to say whether or not it's had an impact. I know it has, but it's not, a numerical quantification that we can point to. But one thing I can say is that we do talk to drug companies, and they will listen to us. Why do they listen to us? Well, we create this 5-star system and we publish it. And the idea here is not to punish for a trial that isn't patient-centric. It's to reward for a trial that is. It's the carrot versus the stick. And we want to make sure that people who are designing these trials strive for patient centricity. And we know that they like having 5 stars, because I saw in a scientific meeting, somebody was just talking about the design of their trial. And on their last slide, they said, hey, we got 5 stars on the PaCT rating system. Credibility. So it was pleased to see that. And we're definitely, I would say that that's evidence of impact. The other thing is it's great for somebody who's seeking a clinical trial. Again, you don't know whether the therapy is going to work. You don't know whether it's going to be available in your community. But one thing you might want to know is whether or not it has been designed with patient centricity in mind. So it's a good resource for the community. So I mentioned that the advancing science quickly or rapidly was one of the attributes. And there was a lot of sub-attributes underneath that. And we said, as what we've seen over the time since the rating scale was developed is that science has moved more quickly than our rating scale. And there were several sub-attributes that we couldn't really give points to because they were the old way of doing things. And so we wanted to make sure that we recognize the fact that science had moved forward. And so I was resistant at first because, we have a rich history of PaCTD ratings. And there was this beautiful objectivity to just, I'm a numerical guy, objectivity to just point here, no point there, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we'll calculate the score. So we went to more of a know it when you see it kind of a thing. Like this does feel like, moving science quickly. This does feel like innovation. And so we've gone to more of a sliding scale for those 1.5 stars that the advancing science quickly represents, but it's working. It's working. And we've been able to reward companies for thinking creatively, for designing trials that will move the science forward for the community, because there's nothing more humane than getting the science right and getting drugs out there for patients that need them. So the impact is that we can engage with the drug sponsors, and it's been mentioned at scientific meetings. And I feel like, again, we want to reward drug sponsors for designing trials that are patient-centric. We want to provide the carrot and not the stick. And we want to have cool heads without our hair on fire.
Thank you so much. So you've heard some really great ideas among our panel. We're going to open it up for questions, and I'm actually going to kick it off. David or Caitlin, can you think of, in your personal experience or your boss's, a time where you thought one way about something, but advocates came in and changed your mind?
I mean, Rosa's can self-confess, pretty set in her ways. I actually think in some ways she has changed a bit on expanded access. FDA, whether it's the food or the drug side, has always been a longstanding passion of hers, and in terms of safety and efficacy, and that FDA gold standard. But recognizing that for individuals with a terminal illness that is 100% fatal, we have to give people opportunities to at least try. So I do think, and that's in some ways, I think, because of this community and others that have really fought. And obviously we saw a lot of that during, well, I wasn't alive for it, but during the HIV, era. I mean, this is not new for diseases that have really struggled with experimental diseases, and so one would hope that, FDA would have maybe changed its tune and, saw what happened in the past. And I think sometimes people have been there for a long time and perceive things and their worldview the same way. And so, I mean, again, that's why I think it's a credit to this community for, getting Congress to say to FDA and frankly NIH, who did have, I mean, David would know better than I, that did have issues with ACT for ALS, that the paradigm does need to shift. The traditional way of doing things is not working. So,
thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir, back there. Is there a microphone? We have a microphone coming, and I know that we're monitoring questions on screen too. So if folks on Zoom want to give us a question, you can type that in.
Thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. So a question about advocacy, and I hope that this comes across non-judgmentally because it's definitely meant to, is looking at the advocacy for Relivrio, got a drug. I mean, it seemed like the advocacy really pushed that drug forward to be able to get to us sooner than it would have otherwise. And then it failed. And I know several people who felt incredibly hurt by that and feel like the early approval may have been a mistake because the hope got up and then it got dashed. So, not to relive that particular one, but what lessons do we have from that about what we choose to advocate for and how to balance that advocacy against the important FDA roles of ensuring that a drug is going to be safe and effective, which there are clearly a lot of arguments about how to judge those levels as well.
I can speak to that some.
And you go, and then
Perfect.
I'll
Well,
add on if I feel you haven't covered it properly.
No, I'm actually really glad you brought up the Relivrio example, because I see it that FDA approved a drug based on early but promising data. But I think that the really key thing that happened there was the promise to pull it off the market if follow-up data did not confirm that efficacy. And it didn't. And the company did the right thing and pulled it. That was voluntary. There was no written contractual legal agreement that they pull that from the market, but they did. And I think in a disease with such high unmet need like ALS, there is an imperative to move quickly and to get products to market. But if something doesn't work out, we don't want it to stay on the market. And I think that's the really crucial component, that there's this balance that we need to strike between early access and maintaining FDA's gold standard. And I don't know, maybe there is a new legal framework that's needed to address this, rather than essentially good faith. But what happened there is it didn't work out, and the drug was pulled. And at the end of the day, that is just proof positive that FDA can move quickly and then do the right thing to get the drug pulled later.
Not that that was inadequate in any way, but I will. I do want to add to it a little bit. So I was part of the that advocacy when I saw the phase 2 results of that trial. I thought, absolutely, this is going to crush in phase 3. There was the p-value on that gave it the probability that the result occurred by chance, this very positive result, was only 3%. So what are the odds that wasn't a real truthful finding, and that we were going to be able to confirm that in the phase 3? I was shocked when the phase 3 came out. I was really surprised when that happened. But then I got really worried, because the FDA, to your point about them following their own rules, they had offered the community regulatory flexibility to say that we will, if there's something that looks promising, we will exercise regulatory flexibility, and they did, and they allowed this drug on the market. Then when the phase 3 did not replicate the phase 2, I was afraid that they were going to pull back and say, well, regulatory flexibility is a bad idea, and that we shouldn't have done that. I hope that doesn't happen. I really applaud Amylyx for not, pushing to continue the drug, because again, that would have been a negative, and that would have maybe put a chill on regulatory flexibility. So I'm so glad that they did that, even though that was a disappointment to a lot of people in the community. So anyway, that's sort of my point of view, is like, why did the statistics not work out? And I do hope that they will continue to torture the data to figure that out, so that we don't replicate that.
I would also say, from my office's perspective, if we hear from folks that say, urge FDA to approve X. That is not something my boss, since probably forever, is not comfortable doing. She is not a scientist. She's not a doctor. What we can say to FDA is like, please give full and fair consideration to this drug. But at the end of the day, like, we do have to allow FDA to work their processes. And it's her perspective as a member of Congress. Like, that is not her skill set. And I will say something she's been working on forever is mandatory drug recall authority, which, fun fact, FDA does not have. I mean, a perfect example is Zantac stayed on the market after we knew it was forming a carcinogen in the stomach for months until it was pretty much pulled off the shelves everywhere. So that's one thing if you're thinking about like how to engage with members of Congress. Like if you're asked to them, it's going to say, please say to FDA, please approve this drug. I would venture guess most members are not going to be comfortable doing that. We can help with the funding though. And if there are issues, like if, you know, we send inquiries over to FDA all the time, like what's going on with X? Can you explain this process? What is the framework looking, just to try to get from a policy perspective? But in terms of like once FDA is in the process of going through an application, that's where we kind of take a step back.
Thank you. Any other questions? Do we have any questions online? No? Yes? We're just waiting for the microphone.
So a question from Meg. How can children and young adults become advocates? And how would you suggest they get involved in advocacy? I know this was a question also posed yesterday, but for those that may not have been here, I think it's a great opportunity to address.
May I address that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Sharon,
yes,
you
please.
can.
Yes, Sharon, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. In the young onset community, an organization was formed called Lorenzo's House, and it is the most outstanding organization for children and young adults to be able to talk about their story with their parent who is a younger onset dementia and how it affected them, and talk amongst themselves so they don't feel so alone. Lorenzo's House has a youth summit. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. The kids lead it. They also support those of us that are care partners in the community and the people with young onset in support groups, but the children are really the focus. Our community has so many children. 1/3 of our community has someone under the age of 18 living at home. It is a huge issue, and the children can really tell a story like no one else can.
I was going to say, in taking meetings, I love when there are children and younger people in meetings, because it gives like me hope for like they're going to be adults at some point, and you know they're going to be voters too, and people are making policies that impact them. So kids they might not be able to vote, but they do have standing. And you know, when we talk about ALS, I like the framing. It's like always it's the family's diagnosis. So what does that mean to children and anyone in the household? And you know, meeting with family members, it's like their sibling might have a disease. Like, how does that impact them? So again, everybody's voice and perspective matters. So that's a great question.
I would like to add a quick anecdote. I was out on the National Mall yesterday, and I was engaging passersby on the flag event, and I ended up, this one family, 2 kids were kind of meandering in the flags, and I started talking to them about the flags, and they said, and I was explaining what they were about and what was on them. And then eventually the parents came over, and I asked the kids to explain it to the mom and dad, and they did a great job. And so I think that, you know, so you can start with the kids. And like you said, if you bring some, you know, not only will the kids grow up to be voters, their parents are voters. And so that, you know, I think that the kids can actually spread the word.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I believe this question might be for Rob. My name is Candace, and the clinical trials, what do you do when you outage them? Or you can't, or if, for example, 31 years with ALS, nobody wants to find out why.
Well, that's not true. So part of the reason, and it sounds practically inhumane, but part of the reason that clinical trials are designed that way, where they want people that are early on in their disease, is it helps create a homogeneous pool, and it makes it easier to compare and measure progression. So that's part of the reason that that happens. Now, does that mean that you can't participate? And I've talked with people that are ineligible for what we call disease modifying interventional trials. But there are a lot of observational trials, and there's things that we can learn when people participate in those. And so, again, it's an act of altruism. It takes time. It might take effort, but there's valuable information that can be gained that way. So that there are opportunities. They may not be an opportunity to receive a drug disease modifying therapy, but there are opportunities to participate and help the community learn.
I think I reworded that wrong. I've never taken a drug for ALS. I won't take a drug for ALS.
Oh, you have no intention?
I have no intention to take a drug. I got this and I refuse to take a drug.
Okay.
But why can't my urine, blood, muscles, stem cell, spinal fluid, ear, hair, find out why I am so different? I won't take a drug, but you can take things out of me to compare me to somebody else.
There are opportunities for
I
people
would-
to do that to you. So.
I would love to hook up
Okay.
with somebody to, I
Yeah.
feel that I'm here for 31 years, 33 years with symptoms to help.
Yeah.
I don't want to take a drug, trust me.
Well,
But
thank you
can-
for that.
You can take out of me
Okay.
and find
I'm
out why.
not me personally, but there
But-
are observational trials that you can
Absolutely.
contribute to. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Lisa? Yep, over here.
Thank you, Lisa, again. Met me yesterday. Candace, there are, as you said, observational trials. May I be specific? TDI, Therapeutic Development Institute for ALS, is happy to take specimens from you and take your history. CDC also has a registry. And so without participating actively in an intervention, the natural history or natural progress of the disease, even after we time out, as I have, is very much interested in gathering that data, compiling that data, and data banking is really hot right now. I'm sure somebody will address it sometime, so that we can really get a handle on this disease, which I believe is more than one disease. We are not a heterogeneous. I'm bulbar, and so they're not subsets necessarily in trials. So I think this is one way of developing some sort of understanding of all the different subsets and how different pharma and whatnot can help us. Thanks.
Yes, sir, over here again.
In the last couple of days, I visited several offices and asked for full funding of ACT for ALS, but I don't really understand what that means. So Caitlin, you addressed it a little bit, but how do we find out what has been funded, what's still open? What's the funding process that we're actually looking for after a law has been passed?
Sure. Well, you made the right ask, so thank you. Full funding means, let me take a step back. In a bill like ACT for ALS, it had a number of policy changes, but it also said in order to implement these policy changes, there was authorized to be, $100 million per year, 25 million for FDA, 75 million for NIH. As appropriators, that is a guidance level. In an ideal world, we'd be able to fully fund, hit that target right away. That is not always the case. Oftentimes we can go above the authorized level, but again, it's more of a guidance. So the first year what year was that? 2022, it was $25 million at NIH. And part of that stemmed from the fiscal year is theoretically, October 1 to September 30th. If we were in an ideal world, everything would be done on time. We just finished fiscal year 24 in March. So we're not always on time. So that's part of the problem too. And I think in this, if I'm remembering this year correctly, we finished a bit later. So 25 million made sense at that time because NIH would not have been able to get that money, like say the full 75 out by September 30th. So, but since then, they got their initial 25 million. Since then, we have done the full 75 at NIH. And we had to, and because of advocates that were monitoring the NIH that said, well, that first year NIH may have moved some of that money over for basic research, which was not the purpose of Act for ALS, we were able to write some language into the appropriations bill to remind them that this is for clinical work and access. I don't know if they love that, but that's what we told them to do. So that means full funding. So it's 100 million, 25 for FDA, 75 for NIH. We've been able to do that. That is unheard of in a lot of instances. And I know David had mentioned, we were talking the other day, that this will have to, like with anything, it's authorized for a certain amount of time. These bills have to be reauthorized. And so maybe when reauthorization is up, we're asking for $200 million a year. Again, appropriations, we have to work within the dollar amount we've been given, and that can be tricky, especially right now that we have a cap that, not to be alarmist, but we do expect in the House that the labor HHS bill could be cut by 17%. When there were cuts last Congress, Act for ALS was not impacted, but a number of other programs were. So everyone should be concerned. We all got to be rowing in the same direction. So I hope that helped explain the full funding component. I will say, don't get paranoid about reauthorization because we do fund programs that are not reauthorized and in some instances have not been reauthorized since the 70s. So that's a conversation for another day. But that's what, when you ask for full funding, it's that right now it's 75 million for NIH, 25 million for FDA.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Paul Seifert. I have a comment and a question for Caitlin. Comment just for the audience about setting hair on fire. I've been a lobbyist for 22 years. I'm not in favor of setting hair on fire, but let's be clear. Sometimes you have to make trouble. Okay? The civil rights community did not get what it got by being peaceful about it. Bring it a little closer. A bunch of disability advocates got arrested in the Capitol in the late 80s, and that's how we got the ADA. Okay? And a little closer. The ACT UP community certainly wasn't very polite about their advocacy. So I'm not in favor of setting hair on fire, but I will light a match and threaten it, just to be clear. Okay? And it won't be my hair. Question for Caitlin. A lot of people aren't going to know what I'm talking about here. Have you got your 302B yet?
That is a great question. It's good to see you again. So the 302B is, okay, so there's 12 appropriations subcommittees. I should just done Approps 101 today. I'm so sorry. If you ever want it, I'll give you my info. I'm happy to chat about it. So there's 12 subcommittees that run the gamut of the different agencies. So that's why Rosa's bill is the Department of Labor, HHS, Education, and then there's the other related agencies, which also includes the Social Security Administration, the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. There's just a few more that I'm forgetting. I don't cover them. So it runs the gamut. So like the Department of Defense by itself, that's a whole other saga. Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development together. So there's one big number for all 12 of the bills. Usually defense is over here, and then all 11 then are, the rest of the 11 that are non-defense are pretty much fighting for the biggest slice of the pie. So that is a long way of me saying, so 302B is what the individual subcommittee receives. And we did receive it, and I cannot tell you the number off the top of my head because it's multiple millions of billions of, not even millions, Jesus, billions of dollars. However, because, and I say that with, we have the 302B, but it is, especially in the House Republicans are going to be it is our anticipation that they are going to be marking up lower than the 302B because of, they want to cut funding. So we are not due to see that bill until, which I know June's tomorrow, but sometime in June. Last year, the big pots, if you will, that got rated for cuts was the Department of Education Title I schools. That's most public schools in the United States, would have led to like 80,000. Again, I don't cover this, so I'm like, I shouldn't be talking about it, but like 80,000 teachers getting laid off. Department of Labor got rated. There was actually cuts to the NIH, specifically in the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Mental Health, and the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. We were able to stave off a lot of these cuts, and I'll spare you the whole list of cuts, but we saw that across the board in like every bill. So that's a very wonky, and I'm sorry to do that. It's a wonky way of like, we do have our allocation. I don't think we'll see that dollar amount being fully used. The Senate, shockingly, and I say that as a former Senate staffer, had a bipartisan process last year for appropriations. They got their bills passed on the floor, which was the first time in about 5 years, I want to say. It is our expectation they will probably have a similar bipartisan process, which means they will mark up to what was agreed upon in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which was the bill that established these caps. So there might be some increases, but again, level funding is a victory, which is horrifying for Rosa and I to say, but that is the reality. But it's, and I should say this moving forward, the fiscal year ends October 1st. Given that it's an election year, realistically, we're probably going to see a continuing resolution, which just means we will continue with the levels from fiscal year 24. And that's probably going to set up a bit of a, I don't want to say a fight, but a bit of a fight in December after the election, because the election will really determine where a lot of things are going. So I hope that helps. You're welcome.
We have a question online. We're just waiting for the microphone.
So I think it's more of a response to the question of, I think that's Candace. So just so everyone does know that Casey Holmes is sharing that Target ALS at Georgetown University is an observational study available locally. I believe NIH might also have an observational study with Dr. Kwan. She works at, Casey is saying she works at Georgetown with Target, and she is happy to chat with anyone. Obviously, Casey is online, so if anyone does want to chat with her and receive her information, I'll request that for you.
Sure, I can put it in the chat.
Yes, a question over here. Hop the cure.
Hey, I think I'm one of those hair on fire advocates because I'm new to the space and kind of ignorant. And so, and I was in a room with Paul yesterday, and so I align kind of with him, but I'm also, Rob is also a dear friend. And so I'm happy to be more of a smoldering on, hair guy. And so I want to do it right. So, my question is there a place, because there's so much going on with the bills and the policies and things like this, where can somebody like me go to see what's, is there a place where all of this is in one place where I can kind of look at it, identify where I can best support and tackle in my home state, and then come back here and bark down the halls quietly? And so that's my question.
Yeah, Ron, go ahead.
Needs to register with the National Registry. When you register with the National Registry, it will send you, it's got a little box to check that says, I want to know about all drug trials. I want to know about all research projects. And it will send you, every time there's a new research project, there's a new drug trial, it will do all of that for you. That will cover pretty much the federal gamut of it. The way to figure it out in your local state, that's an excellent question because every state's different. Some states hide their money in different pockets and they call it different things. So the way you really have to do a state is to get with your local representative or senator and say, hey, what do you guys fund for ALS? Because some states have this pocket of money that they give to various diseases, not just ALS. So it's hard to find that money, but federally, you have to register with the CDC. Also, when you register with the CDC, that's the only way we know what the true count is of the people with ALS. ALS is not a reportable disease, only in the state of Massachusetts, Vermont, and there's a couple other states that are working on that. It's not reportable. So the number that you see, the 30 to 35,000 people, that number could be 50 or 60,000 if everyone with ALS registers. So it's grossly important to make sure that everyone you know with ALS registers with the CDC. Sorry to get on my CDC soapbox, but I give a presentation on that for the ALS Association. So,
And I would say for legislation, I would probably look to some of the organizations like ALS United, AM ALS that might have, not to like, I haven't been on the website lately, but might have legislative trackers. I would say from like a House of Representatives perspective, that would be lovely. There's also congress.gov. You can search for bills, and I believe you can set up notifications for individual things. But the reality is, to be candid, a lot of bills get introduced in Congress and go nowhere. If you're interested in the appropriations fights, we're pretty biased towards the Democratic Appropriations House website. If you Google that, we'll have fact sheets about what's going on, when hearings are, markups are where we decide on, like we'll try to make amendments to funding levels or policy changes and things like that. So that, like I said, that's going to be coming up. I believe the Senate is going to be in July, but every committee in Congress is its own individual kingdom and has their own policies and agendas. So it is really just identifying where the bills that are of interest to you reside and just see what action they're doing. Not to be a very pessimistic, because I promise you I'm really not. Given that it's an election year, things are really going to be slower than they have been in terms of making real progress, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm wrapping now.
Okay, actually, I think our time has come to an end. I want to thank everyone for being here and on our Zoom rooms. And thanks to our panel for giving us a lot of insight. And I'm going to steal something from Sharon and hope that you all take a dip into the advocacy lake. Thank you all.
I have one plug to make, and it has nothing to do with this panel, but the ALS Association has a thing called ALS Focus. What it is a whole bunch of surveys. Actually, not a whole bunch. We do 2 to 3 a year. And the idea of the surveys is to gather information to pass on to researchers from patients and caregivers. Out there on that table out there, there's a little postcard here, tells you how to sign up. It's great information. Next survey we're coming out with is on being able to get from your house to the doctors or to the dentist or to a local restaurant and how you do that. The results of that survey were used in getting the lift approval for wheelchairs. Last year ago, May, that wasn't approved. So the results of that went into that pot of information. Like Caitlin says, everybody's got to be saying the same thing. So pick up a card. If you have any questions about it, ask me. Sorry. Nothing to do with this panel.
You have the mic.